Nusio fired me on her first day. The tulips I brought still trembling in my hands. Pack your desk, Rachel. You're done here. But 3 days ago I'd signed something she didn't know about. Papers that made me the real owner. Next morning my assistant ran in, face pale. Boss, you need to see what's happening. The tulips were still trembling in my hands when Hazel Winters looked straight at me and said, "Pack your desk, Rachel. You're done here." Wait. Not Charlotte. My actual name, the one I'd carried for 48 years, the one printed on every award and contract and performance review for the past 23 years, didn't matter enough for her to remember. Before we continue, if you believe loyalty and sacrifice deserve more than dismissal, please hit that subscribe button. It's free and helps us share stories that matter. Now let's see how this unfolds. Around the boardroom table, 3 newly appointed directors sat frozen. Nobody corrected her. Nobody defended me. They just stared. Some with pity, others with the uncomfortable relief of people grateful it wasn't happening to them. I'd walked into that conference room carrying red tulips as a welcome gesture. A bridge between Eleanor's legacy and whatever came next. Simple, respectful, human. Hazel hadn't even glanced at the flowers before destroying my career. But here's what she didn't know. What nobody in that room knew. 3 days earlier, I'd signed papers in a hospital room that made me the majority owner of Ashford Industries. The company she thought she controlled? It was already mine. The fountain pen in my blazer pocket, Eleanor's pen, the one she'd used to sign the company's incorporation papers 40 years ago, pressed against my ribs like a secret weapon. Hazel thought she'd won. She had no idea the game had already ended. Let me take you back to how this really started. Not with my firing, but with the 23 years of sacrifice that led me to that boardroom. The years that taught me what loyalty cost. And what it was worth. I never imagined my life would be measured by what I gave up instead of what I achieved. But that's exactly what happened over 2 decades at Ashford Industries. I started in 2002 as a junior logistics coordinator. The kind of entry-level position where you're invisible unless something goes catastrophically wrong. Fresh out of college with a business degree and more ambition than common sense, I decided early that I'd make myself essential through competence nobody could dismiss. I learned everything. Every department, every process, every fragile link in our supply chain. I memorized shipping routes and vendor contracts. I knew the names of warehouse managers in cities I'd never visited. I studied our competitors' weaknesses and our own operational blind spots until I could predict problems before they became crises. The Seattle expansion in 2007 should have been my breaking point. Permit delays threatened to derail the entire project. Millions of dollars hung in the balance. The senior VP at the time was ready to pull the plug and cut our losses. I was 29 years old, barely 5 years into my career, and I volunteered to fix it. I spent 3 weeks living in a corporate apartment that smelled like industrial cleaner and yesterday's takeout. I sat across from city officials and contractors, finding compromises in zoning regulations everyone else insisted were impossible. I negotiated environmental requirements with activists who'd been fighting commercial development for years. I barely slept. I lived on coffee and stubbornness. We broke ground 6 weeks ahead of the revised schedule. Eleanor Ashford called me into her office the day after the groundbreaking ceremony. She didn't smile, Eleanor rarely did, but she handed me a worn copy of The Art of War and said something I'd never forget. "Read this twice before you make any major decision. You've got instincts, Charlotte. But instincts without strategy are just gambling." That book became my Bible. I underlined passages until the pages threatened to fall apart. I carried it in my briefcase for years, a reminder that someone believed I was capable of more than logistics coordination. Eleanor promoted me to senior operations manager within a year. Then VP of supply chain. Then executive VP with an office on the 10th floor overlooking the river and the old brick manufacturing plant where this empire had begun 40 years earlier. I thought I was building a legacy. Something that would outlast me. Something meaningful. I didn't realize I was building a prison with walls made of sacrifice and doors that only locked from the outside. The guilt lives in my chest like something physical. A stone I swallowed years ago that never dissolved, never passed, just sits there getting heavier. My mother called on a Tuesday afternoon in October 2015. I remember the exact day because Tuesdays were budget review meetings and I was already running late. Her voice sounded different on the phone. Thinner. like she was stretching it across something heavy she didn't want me to notice. "The doctor wants to run some more tests," she said, trying to sound casual. "But I'm sure it's nothing, sweetheart. You know how they are, better safe than sorry." I told her I'd drive up that weekend. I meant it completely. But Thursday morning, the Chicago plant crisis erupted. 400 jobs at risk. A key supplier threatening to walk away over a contract dispute nobody else seemed capable of resolving. Millions in potential losses if we couldn't negotiate a solution before their Monday deadline. I flew to Chicago on Friday afternoon instead of driving north to my mother. I told myself it was temporary. One weekend. One crisis. She was strong. She'd understand. She always understood when work demanded everything from me. The test results came back Sunday morning. Stage 4 lung cancer already spread to her bones. The oncologist gave her 3 months if she was lucky. Maybe 4. I tried to rearrange my schedule. I genuinely tried. But the Berlin merger negotiations started 2 weeks later, and Eleanor pulled me into her office with that expression I'd learned to recognize. The one that meant she needed me specifically because nobody else could do what needed to be done. "Your mother raised a woman who saves families," Eleanor told me, her hand on my shoulder in the closest thing to maternal affection she'd ever shown me. "She'd be proud of what you're doing. 400 families in Chicago still have paychecks because you flew out there and fixed what nobody else could fix. That matters, Charlotte." So I went to Berlin. I sat across from German executives and argued contract terms in broken German supplemented by a translator who chain-smoked through every break. I negotiated for 6 days straight and closed the deal in half the projected time. I felt accomplished on the flight home. Valuable. My mother died while I was somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean. I'd turned off my phone for the international flight, company policy about secure communications. When I landed and powered it back on, I had 17 missed calls and a voicemail from my aunt that still plays in my head some nights when I can't sleep. "She asked for you at the end, honey. She kept saying your name. I told her you'd be here soon. I'm so sorry." I made it to the funeral 3 days later. I wore a black dress I bought at an airport shop because I hadn't had time to go home first. I accepted condolences from neighbors and distant relatives who barely remembered my face. I stood at the graveside while a pastor who'd never met my mother delivered generic platitudes about her kindness. I went back to work the following Monday. Because that's what you do when you've already sacrificed everything that mattered. You keep moving forward because stopping would mean acknowledging what you've lost, and that acknowledgement might shatter you completely. Working for Eleanor Ashford wasn't like having a boss. It was like serving a cause, something permanent and larger than individual ambition. She wasn't warm. Warmth wasn't in her vocabulary. But she was consistent, and in a corporate world where executives came and went with quarterly earnings reports, Eleanor was a monument. Unmovable. Principled in ways that felt increasingly rare. She'd built Ashford Industries through calculated intelligence and strategic risk-taking, not through charm or family connections. She valued results over relationships, loyalty over likability. I fit perfectly into that philosophy. My routine became my entire identity. Early mornings at the office before most employees arrived. Late nights reviewing supply chain reports while the cleaning crew vacuumed around my desk. Weekends catching up on emails and strategic planning documents most executives would delegate to subordinates. I had a small apartment I'd chosen purely for its 10-minute commute to the office. I had furniture I'd ordered online without much thought. Functional, forgettable. I had a gym membership I renewed automatically every January despite never actually using it. I had a dating life that consisted of politely declining setups from well-meaning colleagues who worried I was too isolated. My life was Ashford Industries. And for nearly 2 decades I genuinely believed that was enough. That work could fill all the spaces where other people had families and friendships and lives that existed beyond office walls. Eleanor gave me the art of war and taught me that patience wins more battles than force. She promoted me through the ranks and trusted me with decisions that affected thousands of employees. She made me her right hand, her strategic backup, the person she called at odd hours when she needed a second opinion on problems she'd usually already solved but wanted to test against someone else's instincts. I thought I'd found my purpose, my place in the world. But even the strongest routines develop cracks if you look closely enough. 3 years ago, Eleanor started talking about succession planning. She was approaching 70, Still sharp as ever but realistic about mortality in a way successful people often aren't until time forces the conversation. I assumed she'd promote from within. Someone who understood the culture, the values, the operational principles that had sustained Ashford through multiple recessions and industry upheavals. Then Hazel Winters appeared. Young mid-30s at most. Ivy League credentials displayed like armor plating. Ruthless efficiency wrapped in designer suits and perfectly calculated smiles. Eleanor hired her as VP of Operations and immediately started treating her like the heir apparent. I buried my disappointment deep. Told myself it made strategic sense. Fresh perspective. New energy for a changing industry. The company needed to evolve, not stagnate under the same leadership structure forever. But I noticed things. Small things that accumulated like sediment at the bottom of a river, eventually changing its entire course. Budget meetings where Hazel would challenge operational decisions Eleanor and I had made, suggesting more aggressive approaches that prioritized short-term profits over long-term stability. Younger managers gravitating toward her, nodding enthusiastically as she dismissed decades of institutional wisdom as legacy thinking that holds us back from real growth. I watched Eleanor grow quieter in those meetings. Her sharp rebuttals softened into tired agreements. She was getting older, I told myself. She was creating space for the next generation to lead. But sometimes I'd catch her watching Hazel with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Doubt? Regret? Something darker that almost looked like fear? Then came the diagnosis last spring. Breast cancer stage 4. Eleanor kept working through chemotherapy, her hair thinning beneath silk scarves she wore like crowns of dignity. The board grew restless. Investors started whispering about leadership transitions and continuity planning. And Hazel began acting like the CEO she hadn't officially become yet. She reorganized departments without consultation. She replaced senior managers with her own hires. Young, ambitious people who shared her philosophy that sentiment was weakness and loyalty was just another word for refusing to evolve. She spoke in board meetings as though Eleanor's opinion was optional background noise rather than foundational wisdom. I wanted to push back. Wanted to fight for the company I'd sacrificed so much to build and protect. But exhaustion had settled into my bones like an old injury that aches when the weather changes. Part of me, the part that had missed my mother's death and given up every personal relationship for this place, wondered if maybe it was time to let go. To accept that my era was ending and Hazel's was beginning, whether I approved or not. I didn't know Eleanor had other plans. Plans conceived in a hospital room where machines beeped softly and death waited patiently in the corner. Plans that involved a fountain pen, a stock transfer, and one final test of everyone's true character. Plans that would change absolutely everything I thought I understood about loyalty, legacy, and the real price of silence. Eleanor died on a Saturday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my apartment. The call came from her personal assistant. Not the hospital, not a doctor, but Margaret, who'd worked for Eleanor for 30 years and whose voice cracked when she said, "She's gone, Charlotte." Peacefully. In her sleep. I sat frozen on my couch, the phone pressed to my ear, unable to process the words. Eleanor Ashford. The monument, the empire builder, the woman who'd seemed too stubborn and too essential to ever actually die, was gone. The funeral arrangements are being handled by her nephew, Margaret continued, her voice steadier now, slipping back into professional efficiency. He's flying in from California. There will be a private service Thursday, then a company memorial next week. The nephew. I'd met him once at a holiday party years ago. He'd spent the entire evening checking his phone and asking Eleanor when she planned to retire so he could unlock the company's real value. She'd smiled tightly and changed the subject. Now he'd be handling her funeral. I thanked Margaret and ended the call. Then I sat in the silence of my apartment and realized I hadn't cried yet. Hadn't felt anything except a hollow numbness that might have been shock or might have been the accumulated exhaustion of 2 decades spent feeling too much. The funeral was exactly what I expected. Tasteful, expensive, and completely devoid of Eleanor's actual personality. Her nephew gave a speech about her entrepreneurial spirit that made her sound like a motivational poster. Board members offered carefully worded condolences that felt more like networking opportunities. I stood in the back wearing the same black dress I'd worn to my mother's funeral, and wondered if Eleanor would have hated this as much as I did. The real call came 3 days later. Thursday night. Just after 9 p.m. I was at my desk. Where else would I be? Finishing a presentation on supply chain optimization for the quarterly board meeting scheduled for the following week. My phone lit up with a number that made my stomach drop before I'd even processed what I was seeing. Ashford Memorial Hospital. For a disorienting moment I thought there'd been a mistake. That Eleanor wasn't actually dead, that the funeral had been some elaborate corporate confusion. But when I answered, the nurse's voice was professionally gentle in that way that always precedes something difficult. Miss Brennan? This is Jennifer from Ashford Memorial. I'm calling because we found something in Ms. Ashford's personal effects that's addressed to you. The instructions say it's time-sensitive and should be delivered immediately. My heart hammered. What kind of something? A sealed envelope and a leather portfolio. Ms. Ashford left very specific instructions that they be given to you exactly 3 days after her passing. That's today. Can you come to the hospital tonight? I grabbed my coat and keys without answering, leaving my office dark and my computer running. The presentation could wait. Everything could wait. The drive felt surreal. Empty highways lit by street lamps. The city suspended in that strange late-night quiet when the day people have gone home and the night people haven't yet emerged. I thought about all the times Eleanor had called me in for late-night strategy sessions, her office smelling of coffee and leather-bound books. I thought about the day she'd handed me The Art of War and told me patience won more battles than force. I thought about my mother's hospital room 3 years ago, and how I'd arrived too late to say goodbye. This time I told myself I wouldn't be too late. Even if Eleanor was already gone, maybe there was still something I could do. Some final instruction I could follow, some last task that would make the emptiness feel less permanent. The nurse met me in the lobby and handed me the portfolio without ceremony. Ms. Ashford was very specific about timing, she said. She recorded the video message 2 weeks before she passed. Said you'd understand when you watched it. Video message. My hands shook as I carried the portfolio to my car. I didn't want to watch it in a hospital parking lot, but I couldn't wait until I got home either. I sat in my car under a flickering streetlight and opened the portfolio. Inside were documents I didn't immediately understand. Stock certificates, transfer agreements, pages of legal language dense enough to require a lawyer's interpretation. But the summary page was clear enough. Eleanor was transferring 44% of Ashford Industries to me. I read it 3 times before the implications fully registered. 44%. Combined with the 7% I'd accumulated over the years through employee stock purchase programs, that gave me 51% total. Majority control. My breath came shallow and fast. This couldn't be real. Eleanor had a nephew. She had board members who'd been with her since the beginning. She had a succession plan everyone knew about. The one where Hazel Winters took over as CEO and continued the company's evolution into whatever ruthlessly efficient future she'd been architecting. But here, in black and white legal language notarized 2 weeks before Eleanor's death, was proof that the succession plan everyone knew about had been a smokescreen. Eleanor had given me the company. I found the tablet at the bottom of the portfolio, already queued to a video file dated 3 weeks ago. My hands trembled as I pressed play. Eleanor's face filled the screen. She was in her hospital room, thinner than I'd ever seen her, but her eyes were sharp and clear. No fog of medication. No weakness. Just pure, calculated intelligence. "Charlotte," she began, her voice raspy but firm, "if you're watching this, I'm gone. And you're about to inherit something far more complicated than stock certificates." She paused, gathering breath. "I've watched that board position themselves like vultures for the past year. I've watched Hazel operate, and I know exactly what she'll do the moment I'm dead. She'll consolidate power. She'll purge anyone loyal to the old ways. She'll turn Ashford Industries into a profit extraction machine that destroys everything I spent 40 years building." My throat tightened. "But you, Charlotte, you understand what this company really means. Not because you're sentimental, but because you've already paid the price to protect it. You missed your mother's last Christmas for a merger in Germany. You've sacrificed relationships, health, any semblance of a normal life. You've proven loyalty isn't just a word for you. It's a choice you've made over and over, even when it cost you everything." Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her expression hardening with intent I recognized from dozens of strategic meetings where she'd orchestrated moves her opponents never saw coming. "So here's what's going to happen. These documents transfer majority ownership to you, Effective 3 days after my death. That's today if my timing was correct. The SEC filing will process automatically. By Friday morning it'll be public record. Friday. 2 days from now. But here's the important part, Charlotte. Don't reveal this yet. Let Hazel think she's won. Let the board show their true loyalties. Let everyone expose exactly who they are when they believe you're powerless. Because that's when people reveal their real nature. Not in moments of scrutiny, but in moments when they think nobody's watching. He smiled, thin and knowing. And when you're ready, when they've shown you everything you need to see, then you make your move. Not with anger. Not with revenge. But with the quiet authority of someone who's been carrying this company on their shoulders for 23 years while everyone else was too busy positioning for promotions to notice. The video ended. I sat in my car under that flickering streetlight, holding a tablet that contained Eleanor's final message and a portfolio that made me the majority owner of a company that didn't yet know I existed in that capacity. Eleanor had orchestrated one final test. Not just of Hazel or the board but of me too. Could I wait? Could I stay silent while they revealed themselves? Could I endure whatever humiliation they dealt without striking back immediately? The fountain pen was at the bottom of the portfolio, wrapped in soft cloth. Silver, elegant, worn smooth by 4 decades of use. A small note was attached in Eleanor's handwriting. This signed Ashford's incorporation papers. Now it's yours. Use it wisely. I held the pen in my palm, feeling its weight. Cool metal against my skin, heavier than something so small should be. Eleanor had given me more than ownership. She'd given me a strategy. A final lesson in patience and timing, taught from beyond the grave by the only person who'd ever truly understood what I'd sacrificed for this company. I drove home through empty streets, the portfolio on my passenger seat like a bomb waiting to detonate. Friday morning the SEC filing would go public. But until then I was supposed to wait. To let Hazel and the board show their true faces. I had no idea how brutal that revelation would be. Or how much it would cost to stay silent while they destroyed everything Eleanor had built. Including me. But Eleanor had trusted me with this final test. And I'd already proven I could sacrifice anything when the stakes were high enough. Even my own dignity. Monday morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of weather that makes everything feel heavier than it should. I woke up early. Not because I'd slept well but because I'd barely slept at all. The fountain pen sat on my nightstand where I'd placed it after getting home from the hospital. The stock certificates were locked in my safe, hidden behind tax documents and passport paperwork nobody would think to look through. Eleanor's voice from the video kept replaying in my mind. Let them reveal themselves. Let Hazel think she's won. I got dressed carefully. Navy blazer, simple blouse, minimal jewelry. Professional but not flashy. I wanted to look like someone who belonged, someone who understood transitions and respected new leadership even when it hurt. At Ashford Industries, morning looked performative. Black armbands had appeared on senior managers over the weekend. The flag outside the building flew at half-mast. Employees spoke in hushed tones in the hallways, sharing carefully curated memories of Eleanor's toughness, her fairness, her legendary work ethic. Nobody mentioned that she died alone except for medical staff. Nobody talked about how the board had already moved on, how Hazel had spent the weekend consolidating power while Eleanor's body was barely cold. I stopped at a florist 3 blocks from the office. The woman behind the counter recognized me. I'd been buying flowers for client meetings and employee celebrations for years. Red tulips, I said. A dozen. Those were Ms. Ashford's favorite, she said softly, wrapping them in simple paper. I'm so sorry for your loss. I nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in my throat. As I walked into Ashford's lobby carrying those tulips, I genuinely believed I was doing the right thing. Building a bridge. Showing respect. Giving Hazel the benefit of doubt she probably didn't deserve but that Eleanor's legacy demanded I offer anyway. The tulips trembled slightly in my hands as I stood outside the executive conference room. I could see silhouettes through the frosted glass. Hazel at the head of the table, several people I didn't immediately recognize seated around her. I took a deep breath, steadied myself and pushed open the door. The temperature dropped the moment I stepped inside. Hazel stood at the head of the conference table in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most employees made in a month. Perfectly tailored. Perfectly composed. Every inch the new CEO who'd finally gotten what she wanted. 3 people sat around the table, directors I didn't recognize. Young, sharply dressed, clearly Hazel's appointments pushed through in the chaos after Eleanor's death. They looked at me with blank expressions that might have been curiosity or might have been something colder. Behind them, standing against the wall, were 4 junior managers. Witnesses, I realized. Hazel had brought an audience for whatever this was. I started to speak, to offer condolences about Eleanor, to welcome Hazel to her new role, to present the tulips as the gesture of respect I'd intended. Hazel didn't let me get that far. She glanced at her Apple Watch with theatrical precision, then looked up at me with eyes that held absolutely no warmth. "Pack your desk, Rachel," she said, her voice carrying across the room like a sentencing. "You're done here." Wait. Not Charlotte. The wrong name landed like a slap. Deliberate. Calculated. Designed to erase me before I'd even left the building. My stomach dropped. Around the table, the 3 new directors sat motionless, their expressions carefully neutral. I searched their faces for confusion. Surely someone would correct her obvious mistake. Surely someone would say, "That's Charlotte Brennan, she's been here 23 years, she's executive VP." Nobody spoke. The tulips shook in my hands. Or maybe that was just me trembling. "My name is Charlotte," I said quietly, forcing my voice to stay steady even as my heart hammered against my ribs. Hazel's smile was thin and cold. "I know what your name is. Rachel Charlotte, it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that Ashford Industries is entering a new era, and that era doesn't include dead weight clinging to outdated sentimentality." Dead weight. The words hit harder than I expected. 23 years of crisis management, of Seattle expansions and Toronto acquisitions and Chicago plant rescues, reduced to dead weight in a single breath. I felt the room shrink around me. Felt every eye turn toward me, not with respect, not even with sympathy, but with the uncomfortable pity people reserve for public executions they're relieved aren't happening to them. "This company needs leaders who understand efficiency and growth," Hazel continued, her voice gaining confidence as she warmed to her performance. "Not people who mistake longevity for competence. Eleanor Ashford built something remarkable, but she also allowed complacency to take root. That ends today." One of the junior managers against the wall, a woman named Sandra from compliance who I'd mentored through her first year, looked like she might cry. Another, Thomas from logistics, had his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. But nobody defended me. Nobody spoke up. Hazel slid a manila folder across the polished mahogany table. Her manicured nails tapped the surface twice, sharp final sounds that echoed in the silence. "Your termination is effective immediately," she said. "Security will escort you out within the hour. We've already restricted your access to all systems and facilities. Your company email has been deactivated. Your security badge will stop working at noon." The efficiency of it was almost impressive. She'd planned every detail. The timing, the audience, the complete removal of my access before I could even process what was happening. Gasps rippled through the room, not from the directors who'd clearly been briefed beforehand, but from the junior managers witnessing this. I saw Sandra cover her mouth with her hand. Thomas looked away, his face flushed with what might have been anger or shame. My fingers tightened around the tulip stems until thorns bit into my palm. The pain was sharp and grounding, reminding me I was still present, still standing, still capable of feeling something other than the numb shock trying to swallow me whole. The fountain pen pressed against my ribs through my blazer pocket. Cool metal that carried Eleanor's final instructions. Let them reveal themselves. This was the revelation then. This public humiliation, this calculated cruelty designed not just to fire me but to make an example of me in front of people who'd worked under me for years. "You already won," I reminded myself. "She just doesn't know it yet." But knowing didn't make the humiliation hurt less. Didn't make the stares less painful. Didn't erase the fact that Hazel had turned my gesture of respect, those red tulips I'd chosen so carefully, into a weapon she'd used against me. I set the flowers on the side table near the door. They looked absurd now, vulnerable and out of place in a room that felt more like an execution chamber than a conference space. "I understand," I said quietly, picking up the termination packet without opening it. My voice didn't shake. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction no matter what it cost me to maintain that composure. "I'll clear my office." Hazel's smile widened, thin, victorious, cruel in a way that told me she was enjoying this far more than professional necessity required. "Good," she said. Then she leaned forward slightly, dropping her voice just enough that everyone in the room had to strain to hear. And Charlotte? This is what happens to people who confuse loyalty with entitlement. Consider it a lesson for everyone else in this company. The message was clear. Challenge me, cling to the old ways, question my authority, and you'll end up just like her. I turned and walked out, leaving the tulips behind on that side table where they'd wilt and brown over the next few days. A small memorial to the bridge I'd tried to build and the naivety I'd carried into that room. The walk back to my office felt longer than it should have. The 10th floor stretched out before me like a gauntlet. Colleagues froze mid-conversation as I passed, their faces cycling through shock and discomfort. Some looked away quickly, unable to meet my eyes. Others stared openly, their expressions a mixture of horror and relief that it wasn't them. I heard whispers following me like a wake. Did you hear what happened? Charlotte Brennan. Fired. Just like that. 23 years and they kicked her out in front of everyone. If they can do that to her, none of us are safe. The termination packet felt heavy under my arm even though it was just paper. Documentation of my erasure, signed and sealed before I'd even known it was coming. Maya looked up from her desk as I approached. She was 26, sharp and ambitious in all the ways I'd been at her age. I'd hired her straight out of grad school and mentored her through every promotion she'd earned. Her face crumbled the moment she saw my expression. Charlotte, what happened? Her voice cracked, young and devastated in a way that made my chest tighten painfully. I've been terminated, I said simply, pushing open my office door. Effective immediately. I couldn't look at her. Couldn't bear to see her grief when I was barely holding my own together with sheer willpower and the knowledge that Friday morning, just 4 days away, would change everything. Through the glass walls of my office, I watched the reactions ripple across the floor. Colleagues gathered in small clusters, phones coming out, the news spreading like wildfire through every department. Some people looked angry. Most looked scared. Because if Hazel could do this to me, 23 years of service, Executive VP, Eleanor's right hand and most trusted advisor, then nobody was safe. And maybe that was exactly Hazel's point. Maybe the cruelty wasn't just about eliminating me. Maybe it was about sending a message to everyone else. This is my company now. I will do whatever I want. And anyone who questions that will be next. I picked up the tulips from where I'd carried them back, placed them in an empty vase on my desk, and began packing up the life I'd built on sacrifice. The cardboard box Maya brought me was standard issue, the same kind we used for storage in the supply closet. Somehow that made it worse. 23 years reduced to something you'd use to pack old files or surplus office supplies. My office had floor-to-ceiling glass walls. Eleanor's design philosophy, she'd always said, was transparency and accountability. Leaders shouldn't hide behind closed doors. They should be visible, accessible, present. In that moment, transparency felt like torture. Every movement I made was visible to the entire 10th floor. Every item I placed in the box became a small public spectacle. Colleagues I'd worked with for years, people I'd mentored, promoted, fought for during budget cuts, watched me dismantle my professional life piece by piece. I started with the framed photographs on my credenza. The Seattle expansion groundbreaking from 2007. Me standing beside Eleanor and the mayor, all of us wearing hard hats and forced smiles for the press. I'd spent 3 weeks in that city negotiating permits everyone else had given up on. The photo captured the victory, not the cost. The Toronto acquisition signing. A boardroom full of executives shaking hands, celebrating the merger. I stood in the back corner of the frame, barely visible, the one who'd actually negotiated every clause during those brutal 16-hour sessions with union leaders. The Chicago plant reopening. 400 workers cheering as Eleanor cut the ribbon on a facility we'd saved from permanent closure. I stood off to the side where I always stood, invisible and essential. Each photograph told the same story. I was there. I did the work. And I was always just outside the frame, just beyond recognition. Maya appeared beside me with tissue paper, her hands shaking as she helped me wrap the frames. She didn't say anything. Didn't need to. The tears running silently down her face said everything. Through the glass walls I could see the reactions rippling across the floor. Sandra from compliance was crying openly at her desk, not even trying to hide it. Thomas from logistics stood by the water cooler with his jaw clenched so tight I worried he'd crack a tooth. Even Kevin from finance, who I'd never particularly liked and who'd never particularly liked me, looked disturbed by what he was witnessing. This wasn't just my firing. It was a public dismantling of everything Eleanor had built her company on: loyalty, respect, earned authority. And everyone knew it. I moved to my desk drawers next, pulling out the accumulated debris of 2 decades. A bronze compass from the Maritime Workers Union, given to me after I'd negotiated fair wages during the 2012 port strike. "So you always know which direction is right," the union rep had said when he pressed it into my hand. A coffee mug from the operations team with a crack running down one side. I'd used it through countless overnight shifts, too tired to walk to the break room for a clean one. A folder of handwritten thank you notes from employees whose jobs I'd saved, whose careers I'd championed, whose families had stayed stable because I'd fought for them when it would have been easier to let them go. As I folded my navy blazer, the one I'd worn to close the Berlin merger, a memory surfaced sharp enough to cut. My mother's voice on the phone, weak but trying to sound cheerful. "I understand, sweetheart. Work is important. We'll celebrate Christmas when you get back." But I hadn't made it back. I'd been in Berlin in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and cigarette smoke, arguing contract terms in broken German supplemented by a translator who looked as exhausted as I felt. I'd stayed because Eleanor had told me I was the only one who could close the deal. The only one the German executives trusted. The only one capable of saving the merger everyone else had already written off as impossible. I'd stayed, and my mother had died 3 weeks later. 3 weeks I could have spent with her. 3 weeks I'd traded for a corporate victory that felt hollow now as I packed it away in a cardboard box. Eleanor had held my hand at the funeral, had told me the sacrifice mattered. "Your mother raised a woman who changes lives," she'd said. "She'd be proud of what you've accomplished." And I'd believed her. God help me, I'd believed her completely. I'd worn that sacrifice like armor for years, proof that I understood what real leadership required. Proof that I was committed in ways other people couldn't match. But standing in my glass-walled office, packing up the life I'd built on that foundation, I wondered, was my mother actually proud? Or did she die feeling abandoned by the daughter who chose a company over her own family? I'd never know. And that uncertainty lived in my chest like something physical. A stone I'd swallowed years ago that never dissolved, never passed, just sat there getting heavier with time. I placed the blazer in the box carefully, running my fingers over the fabric one last time. This was the real cost, I realized. Not the firing. Not the humiliation. Not even the public spectacle Hazel had orchestrated. The cost was all the years I'd given, all the people I'd lost, all the moments I'd missed, and the dawning realization that maybe none of it had mattered as much as I'd convinced myself it did. Maya reappeared in my doorway holding my worn copy of The Art of War, the one Eleanor had given me 22 years ago during my first month as a junior logistics coordinator. "You almost forgot this," she said softly, her voice thick with tears she was trying not to shed. I took the book, feeling its familiar weight. The spine was cracked from countless readings. Pages were dog-eared and annotated in margins filled with my younger self's observations about strategy and patience and timing. Eleanor's inscription on the inside cover still made my throat tighten. "Charlotte, patience and timing win more battles than force. Never forget that." "Thank you," I managed. Maya lingered in the doorway, shifting her weight from foot to foot. She clearly wanted to say something but couldn't figure out how to start. Finally, "This isn't right. What Hazel did, it's not right. Everyone knows it." I set the book gently in the box, buying myself a moment to compose my response. "Sometimes, right, doesn't matter in corporate America, Maya. Power matters. And right now Hazel has it." "But you have," Maya started, then stopped herself abruptly. Her eyes darted toward the large conference room visible through the glass walls. "You have allies. People who remember everything you've done for this company. People who know this is wrong." I followed her gaze. Bodies were filing into the conference room, not just senior staff but middle management, department heads, even junior directors. Hazel stood at the head of the table, animated and commanding, clearly orchestrating her vision for whatever came next. The gathering was larger than I'd initially realized. This wasn't just a senior leadership meeting. This was a company-wide announcement. A declaration. "Maya," I said quietly, turning back to face her, "in times like these, allies become liabilities. Don't risk your job defending me. Keep your head down and survive." That's an order. But even as I said it, my hand drifted unconsciously to the fountain pen in my blazer pocket. Eleanor's pen. The one she'd used to sign Ashford's incorporation papers 40 years ago. The one she'd pressed into my palm in a hospital room with instructions to wait, to watch, to let everyone reveal themselves. Patience and timing win more battles than force. Eleanor had taught me that lesson over and over. And now, from beyond the grave, she was testing whether I'd actually learned it. Maya nodded reluctantly, wiping at her eyes. If you need anything, references, contacts, anything, you know where to find me. I know, I said. Thank you. She left and I went back to packing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Maya, sent less than 30 seconds after she'd walked away. Boss, something's happening. Hazel called an emergency all-staff meeting. She's making her move. I glanced through the glass toward the conference room. The gathering had grown even larger in just the past few minutes. People were standing along the walls now, the room filled beyond its normal capacity. Through the frosted glass, I could see Hazel's silhouette gesturing broadly, her body language confident and commanding. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I could read the scene perfectly. This was her coronation. Her formal assumption of absolute power. Her vision for Ashford's future delivered to everyone at once, so there'd be no confusion about who was in charge and what she expected. Another text appeared, this time from Daniel Reeves, a senior operations manager who'd worked alongside me for 15 years. She's talking about restructuring legacy departments. Risk management, compliance, supply chain, everything Eleanor built. Says it's all bloated with sentiment and inefficiency. This is bad, Charlotte. Really bad. My fingers tightened around my phone. I typed back carefully. Let her talk. Sometimes people reveal more than they intend. But my hands were shaking as I sent it. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. Hazel wasn't just eliminating the old guard. She was dismantling the entire foundation Eleanor had spent 40 years building. The principles, the culture, the operational philosophy that had made Ashford Industries something more than just another corporation grinding workers into profit margins. And everyone in that conference room was either going to resist or comply. By the end of the day, I'd know exactly who stood where. And so would Hazel. I sealed the last box and stacked it with the others. 4 cardboard boxes containing 23 years of my professional life. It didn't seem like enough somehow. Shouldn't a life's work take up more space than that? The tulips I'd brought that morning still sat in their vase on my desk, petals already starting to brown at the edges. Wilting. Dying slowly in the stale office air. I left them there. Let them wilt completely. Let them become a small memorial to the bridge I'd tried to build and the naivety I'd carried into that boardroom. By Friday morning, just 4 days from now, everyone would understand what those dying flowers really represented. Not failure. Not humiliation. But patience. And perfect timing. Security escorted me out at 11:43 a.m. 2 guards I'd known for years. Mike and Travis, who I'd chatted with every morning in the lobby, who'd shown me pictures of their kids and grandkids, who'd always had coffee ready when I arrived early, now walked beside me in silence as I carried my cardboard boxes through the building. They wouldn't meet my eyes. The lobby felt longer than it ever had. Employees stopped what they were doing to watch. Some looked away quickly. Others stared openly, their expressions ranging from shock to pity to the uncomfortable relief of people grateful it wasn't happening to them. Mike held the door open. Travis helped load my boxes into my car without speaking. When I turned to thank them, they were already walking back inside, their shoulders tight with tension I recognized as shame. I drove home through afternoon traffic, my mind strangely blank. Numb. Processing nothing because processing everything at once would have shattered me completely. I spent that evening alone in my apartment, surrounded by boxes I couldn't bring myself to unpack. My small living room felt crowded with the physical evidence of my former life. Photographs I'd probably never hang. What was the point now? Awards I'd probably never display. Books I'd read during late nights when the office felt more like home than this place ever had. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt oppressive. I'd gotten used to the constant hum of Ashford Industries. Phones ringing, conversations in hallways, the rhythmic sounds of a company in motion. Here there was only silence and the occasional rumble of traffic from the street below. I ordered Thai food from the place down the block but couldn't eat more than a few bites. The noodles sat congealing in their container on my coffee table. I poured a glass of wine but left it untouched, condensation beating on the glass as it warmed to room temperature. Instead, I sat on my couch staring at my phone. Waiting. For what? I wasn't entirely sure. Vindication? Catastrophe? Some sign that the universe recognized the injustice of what had happened? My phone stayed mostly dark. A few texts trickled in from former colleagues, carefully worded messages that expressed sympathy without committing to anything actionable. So sorry to hear the news. You'll land on your feet, Charlotte. Let me know if you need a reference. Polite. Distant. Safe. Nobody was willing to take a real risk. Nobody was willing to actually stand up to Hazel or question what had happened. And honestly, I couldn't blame them. I'd watched enough corporate purges over the years to understand how this worked. First the leaders go, publicly, brutally as an example. Then anyone associated with them gets quietly pushed out. Then anyone who questions the new order finds themselves on the next round of restructuring lists. By the time the dust settles, only the compliant remain. Only the people willing to keep their heads down and accept whatever comes next. The fountain pen sat on my coffee table next to the untouched wine, Eleanor's final gift staring back at me like an accusation. Let them reveal themselves, she'd said in that hospital room video. But what if revealing themselves wasn't enough? What if exposure without power to act on it was just another form of helplessness? I picked up the pen, feeling its familiar weight. Cool silver against my skin. Heavy with history and expectation. Friday morning was still 3 days away. 3 days of waiting while Hazel consolidated power and dismantled everything Eleanor had built. 3 days of sitting in this apartment feeling powerless while the company I'd sacrificed everything for slipped further away from what it was supposed to be. Could I actually wait that long? Or would the waiting destroy me first? My phone lit up at 8:47 p.m., shattering the oppressive quiet. A message from Daniel Reeves. Charlotte, you need to hear this. She doesn't know anyone recorded it. My heart hammered as I opened the attachment. An audio file, 3 minutes and 47 seconds long. I pressed play. Static crackled for a moment, then Hazel's voice filled my living room. Sharp, clear, utterly confident in her private cruelty. Charlotte Brennan was a relic. A fossil clinging to Eleanor's skirts. Her termination isn't just necessary, it's symbolic. We're cutting out the cancer of sentimentality that's infected this company for too long. I froze, the phone trembling in my hand. The recording continued. Hazel's voice gained strength, feeding on its own momentum. Risk management, compliance, HR, they'll all be restructured. Anyone loyal to the old guard goes next. I want a clean slate. No one left who remembers Eleanor's sentimental approach to business. No one who'll question my decisions or slow down progress with outdated concerns about employee morale. A male voice interjected, one of the new directors, I thought. What about pushback from the floor? Charlotte was well liked. There's already talk about the way she was terminated. Hazel's laugh was cold, dismissive, almost amused. Let them push back. We'll make examples. Fear is more effective than affection, and loyalty built on fear lasts longer than loyalty built on sentiment. By the end of the quarter, everyone will understand that loyalty to me is the only loyalty that matters. This isn't a democracy. It's a business. And I'm running it my way. Another voice, quieter. What if there's media attention? The optics of firing a 23-year executive on her first day. Then we control the narrative, Hazel cut in smoothly. Underperformance. Resistance to necessary change. Failure to adapt to new leadership. We've got enough documentation to justify the decision if anyone asks. But they won't ask. They never do. The recording ended. I sat in silence, my hands shaking, not from fear but from the crystalline clarity of righteous anger flooding through me. He hadn't just fired me. She'd declared war on everything Eleanor had built, everyone who believed in it, every principle that had made Ashford Industries something more than just another corporation grinding workers into profit margins. And she'd done it with such casual contempt, such certainty that she'd face no consequences, that it took my breath away. I played the recording again. Then a third time. Each replay sharpened my resolve, burned away the numbness I'd been carrying since leaving the building that morning. My first instinct was immediate action. Forward the audio to the board members I trusted. Expose Hazel's contempt and her plans. Rally the allies I knew were scattered throughout the company, show them what they were really dealing with. But Eleanor's voice echoed in my mind, steadying the impulse. Patience and timing win more battles than force. If I played this card now, if I exposed Hazel before Friday before the SEC filing went public, I'd be reacting from a position of weakness. I'd be the bitter former employee with an axe to grind, not the calculated guardian Eleanor had chosen. The board would dismiss me as vengeful. Hazel would spin it as desperation. And worst of all, I'd lose the element of surprise that was my greatest advantage. Eleanor had given me more than just ammunition. She'd given me ownership. Hidden, unexpected, devastating when revealed at exactly the right moment. Let Hazel continue thinking she'd won. Let her grow more confident, more careless, more openly contemptuous. Let her restructure departments and purge loyalists and consolidate power she thought was absolute. Because the higher she climbed on that foundation of arrogance, the further she'd fall when it crumbled beneath her. And when she fell, it would be final. Complete. Irreversible. I saved the audio file in 3 separate locations: cloud storage, encrypted thumb drive, email draft I'd never send but that would exist as backup. Evidence for later when the timing was perfect. Then I texted Daniel back. Thank you. Hold on to your copy. Don't share it with anyone else yet. Trust me. His response came immediately. Are you planning something? I stared at the message for a long moment, the fountain pen still in my other hand. Finally I typed, I'm planning everything. I spent the next hour coordinating a call to Patricia Chin, one of the board members Eleanor had trusted most. She'd served with Eleanor since the early days, remembered what the company stood for before quarterly profits became the only metric that mattered. Patricia, it's Charlotte. I need to talk to you about Friday's board meeting. Her voice was cautious. Charlotte, I heard what happened today. I'm so sorry. The way Hazel handled it was. I know, I interrupted gently. But Friday is going to be different. Very different. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? Early, before anyone else is in the office. Pause. Then, what are you planning? Justice, I said simply. Eleanor's justice. Will you help me? Another pause, longer this time. Then, tell me what you need. By midnight I'd coordinated with Patricia and Daniel. We'd planned every detail. The brass nameplate for the empty chair marked majority shareholder. The timing of Maya's entrance with the SEC notification. The documents I'd need. The votes we'd require. Patricia had been skeptical at first about doing it publicly. We could handle this quietly, Charlotte. Behind closed doors. Less humiliating for everyone involved. No, I'd said firmly. Hazel fired me publicly. She humiliated me in front of everyone to make a point to send a message. This needs to be public too. Not for revenge, for justice. For everyone watching to understand that actions have consequences. Now I lay in bed at 2 a.m. unable to sleep, my mind cycling through every possible scenario. What if the board sided with Hazel despite the ownership transfer? What if I was making a terrible mistake letting pride masquerade as principle? What if Eleanor had been wrong about me and I wasn't capable of carrying this through? The fountain pen sat on my nightstand, silver surface gleaming in the darkness filtering through my bedroom window. Tomorrow, no today now since it was past midnight, was Thursday. Friday morning, everything would change. The SEC filing would go public at 9 a.m. sharp. The ownership transfer Eleanor had timed with surgical precision would detonate exactly when Hazel felt most secure, most certain of her absolute power. And I would walk back into that boardroom carrying 23 years of loyalty, one fountain pen, and the quiet authority of someone who'd been carrying that company on her shoulders while everyone else was too busy positioning for promotions to notice. I closed my eyes, Eleanor's final words playing in my mind. Let them reveal themselves. Then show them the truth. The truth was coming. And it was going to shatter everything Hazel thought she'd won. Friday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that comes after sleepless nights. Everything sharp-edged and hyper-real, colors too bright, sounds too loud. I dressed carefully in front of my bathroom mirror. The same navy blazer I'd worn to close the Berlin merger all those years ago. Simple gold studs in my ears. The ones my mother had given me for my 30th birthday. Minimal makeup. Hair pulled back in a neat bun. Professional. Unshakable. At least on the surface. Inside, my heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape. My hands trembled slightly as I buttoned the blazer, and I had to force myself to breathe slowly, deliberately, to keep the adrenaline from overwhelming me completely. Eleanor's fountain pen sat on my dresser where I'd placed it the night before. I picked it up, feeling its familiar weight settle into my palm. Cool silver against my skin. Heavy with history and expectation. Today I'd use it to sign my name as CEO. Today the test would be over. Today, everyone would see who'd really won. I arrived at Ashford Industries at 8:30 a.m., 30 minutes before the quarterly board meeting was scheduled to begin. The lobby felt different than it had just 4 days ago when security had escorted me out. The same marble floors, the same reception desk, the same corporate artwork on the walls. But everything felt charged now, electric with anticipation only I understood. I walked to the security desk where Mike sat reviewing access logs on his computer. He looked up, saw me, and his expression cycled rapidly through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been hope. "Miss Brennan," he said, standing automatically. "I didn't expect. Your badge was supposed to be." "Still works," I said calmly, holding it up. "Small oversight in the system, I suppose." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Must have been. Good to see you, ma'am." The elevator ride to the 10th floor felt longer than usual, giving me time to center myself. To remember Eleanor's instructions. Let them reveal themselves. Then show them the truth. The truth was about to arrive with the force of a freight train. The executive conference room was already filling when I reached the 10th floor at 8:45 a.m. I stayed in the hallway watching through the frosted glass as directors gathered. Coffee cups in hand, voices low with speculation and the comfortable camaraderie of people who believed they knew exactly what this meeting would bring. The brass nameplate was positioned exactly where Patricia Chin had promised. At the far end of the long mahogany table, directly opposite Hazel's position at the head. Majority shareholder. Directors noticed it immediately. I watched confusion ripple through the room as they glanced at the reserved seat, then at each other, then back at the nameplate like it might offer additional explanation. "Who's the new investor?" Robert Pierce asked, setting down his coffee. "I didn't see anything in the pre-meeting materials." "West Coast Venture Capital, I heard," Margaret Hamilton replied, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely certain. "Someone aligned with Hazel's restructuring vision." "Odd that they'd reserve a seat but not arrive early," Marcus Webb observed, his voice carrying the skepticism of someone who'd been in boardrooms long enough to recognize when something didn't add up. They had no idea. No idea that the majority shareholder was standing 15 feet away in the hallway, listening to every word, waiting for exactly the right moment to shatter their assumptions. Hazel arrived at 8:55 a.m., perfectly composed in a slate gray suit that probably cost what most Ashford employees made in 2 weeks. Her confidence radiated like heat, shoulders back, chin up, movements precise and deliberate. She noticed the nameplate immediately. Her stride faltered for just a fraction of a second before she recovered, her expression smoothing into practiced ease. "Good morning, everyone," she said, setting down her leather portfolio at the head of the table. "I see you've noticed our reserved seat." She smiled, the expression perfectly calibrated to convey insider knowledge. "We have a new board member joining us today. Someone who shares my vision for Ashford's transformation. Their delayed arrival is purely logistical. They're flying in from the West Coast and should be here shortly." The lie was smooth, confident, completely believable to anyone who didn't know the truth. Several directors nodded, reassured by the explanation. The tension in the room eased slightly as they settled into their seats, opening tablets and laptops, preparing for whatever presentation Hazel had planned. But Patricia Chin and Daniel Reeves exchanged knowing glances across the table. A brief moment of eye contact that spoke volumes. And I stood outside the frosted glass doors, the fountain pen gripped in my hand, watching Hazel's performance with something that felt like vindication already beginning to bloom in my chest. Patience and timing, Eleanor had taught me. The timing was about to be perfect. Hazel launched into her presentation at exactly 9 a.m. with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed every word, every gesture, every slide transition. "Ashford Industries stands at a crossroads," she began, pacing slowly beside the projection screen. "We can continue clinging to outdated operational models that prioritize sentiment over efficiency, or we can embrace the transformation necessary to compete in today's marketplace." Her first slide appeared, operational restructuring, a path forward. I watched through the glass as she clicked through her vision, each slide more damning than the last. Eliminating redundancy in risk management. Outsourcing compliance functions to third-party firms. Streamlining supply chain operations by cutting what she called legacy positions. Every bullet point represented departments Eleanor had built. People I'd worked with for decades. Principles that had kept Ashford stable through multiple recessions and industry upheavals. The era of sentiment is over, Hazel declared, her voice gaining strength as she warmed to her topic. We're implementing immediate workforce reductions, targeting middle management positions that duplicate functions and drain resources without adding measurable value. By Q2, we'll have reduced operational costs by 30%. Gasps rippled through the room. Even directors who'd supported Hazel's appointment looked uncomfortable now. 30% wasn't restructuring, it was decimation. Hundreds of jobs eliminated. Families destroyed. Communities devastated. Decades of institutional knowledge erased. What about employee morale? One director ventured, his voice uncertain. What about our reputation as an employer of choice? Hazel's smile was thin, dismissive. Morale adjusts to new realities. Reputation follows performance metrics. Our shareholders care about one thing: returns on their investments. And that's exactly what I'm delivering. She clicked to the next slide. Projected profit margins rising sharply over 18 months. Beautiful curves climbing upward on pristine graphs that reduced human lives to data points. Within 18 months, Ashford will be leaner, faster, and significantly more profitable. That's my promise to this board and to our investors. I watched directors shift uncomfortably in their seats, torn between financial incentives and ethical concerns they couldn't quite articulate. This was the moment Eleanor had orchestrated. Hazel fully revealed. Not just ambitious but ruthless. Not just confident but contemptuous of everything Ashford Industries had stood for. Every word she spoke was digging her grave deeper. And she had absolutely no idea. At 9:17 a.m., exactly as planned, Maya burst through the side entrance. Her face was deliberately pale, eyes wide with what looked like genuine panic. She held her tablet aloft like a messenger bearing urgent news that couldn't wait another second. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through Hazel's presentation like a knife. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but you all need to see this. It's urgent." Confusion rippled through the room. Directors looked up from their notes, uncertain whether this was part of Hazel's planned presentation or an actual emergency. Hazel's expression darkened with irritation. "This is a closed board meeting, Maya. Whatever it is can wait until—" "The SEC filing just went public," Maya interrupted, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. "Ownership change. Effective as of last Thursday." Every phone and tablet in the room lit up simultaneously, notifications chiming like an electronic chorus announcing something monumental. Directors fumbled for their devices, faces shifting rapidly from confusion to shock as they read the message that had just arrived in their inboxes. Ownership transfer notice. Charlotte Brennan holds 44% voting shares of Ashford Industries. Combined with existing employee stock program holdings, 51% total ownership. Majority control established. Board recognition required by federal securities law. The room fell into stunned silence. Directors stared at their screens, then at each other, then at the empty chair marked majority shareholder as understanding slowly dawned. Hazel's face drained of color, her carefully constructed confidence shattering like glass dropped on marble. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again as she searched for words that wouldn't come. "This is impossible," she finally managed, her voice cracking on the last word. "There must be some mistake. Charlotte Brennan was terminated 5 days ago. She has no standing." "Terminated by what authority?" I asked quietly from the doorway. Every head turned. I stood at the threshold, the fountain pen visible in my right hand, Eleanor's legacy made tangible. My expression was calm, composed, carrying 23 years of earned authority that no termination letter could erase. "By your authority, Hazel?" I continued, my voice soft but carrying clearly through the silent room. "The authority you assumed you had?" I didn't rush. Didn't storm in dramatically. I walked with the measured grace of someone who'd earned every step, someone who belonged here far more than the woman standing frozen at the head of the table. My footsteps echoed in the silence. Sharp, deliberate sounds that punctuated the shocked stillness. The fountain pen caught the fluorescent light, its silver surface gleaming like a small sword. Hazel stood completely frozen, her mouth working soundlessly as she tried to formulate a response to something she clearly hadn't prepared for. Her perfect composure had cracked, revealing the desperate ambition underneath. I passed directors I'd worked with for years. Some looked relieved, others shocked, all uncertain what this meant for their futures and their votes and their positions in whatever came next. Marcus Webb met my eyes and nodded slightly, acknowledgement, respect, perhaps even approval. Patricia Chin smiled, subtle but genuine. Daniel Reeves looked like he was trying not to laugh. I reached the empty chair marked majority shareholder but didn't sit immediately. Instead, I stood behind it, one hand resting on the leather back, letting the symbolism settle over the room like snow covering a landscape. Quiet, complete, transformative. For those who don't know the full details, I said calmly, addressing the entire board, Eleanor Ashford transferred majority ownership to me 72 hours before her death. Everything was signed, notarized, and filed with the SEC according to federal requirements. The transfer was completed last Thursday at 11:47 p.m., 5 days before I was publicly terminated in a performance designed to humiliate me and intimidate anyone who might question Ms. Winter's authority. I placed the unopened termination packet on the table in front of me. I never signed this. Because I didn't need to. The room was silent enough to hear breathing, to hear the hum of the projection equipment, to hear Hazel's sharp intake of breath as the full implications continued to unfold. You see, while Hazel was planning her coronation, Eleanor was planning something else entirely. A test. She wanted to see who would reveal their true nature when they thought I had no power. And over the past 5 days, you've all shown exactly who you are. Some directors looked down at their hands, unable to meet my eyes. Others sat up straighter, perhaps recognizing an opportunity to align themselves with the winning side before it was too late. And Hazel looked like she might actually be sick, her face pale and her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles had gone white. I pulled Eleanor's stock transfer documents from my briefcase and slid them across the polished mahogany. These are the originals. Every board member should have received formal notification when the SEC processed the filing. But I suspect someone, I glanced deliberately at the 3 new directors Hazel had appointed, may have intercepted those communications. Finally, slowly, deliberately, I lowered myself into the chair. The leather creaked beneath me, a sound like judgment being passed. The silence in the boardroom stretched tight as a wire about to snap. I sat in the chair marked majority shareholder, Eleanor's fountain pen resting on the table in front of me, the stock transfer documents spread out like evidence in a trial where the verdict had already been determined. Hazel remained standing at the head of the table, her face cycling through emotions too rapidly to fully process. Shock, rage, disbelief, calculation. Her hands gripped the edge of the mahogany so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Directors stared at their tablets, reading and rereading the SEC filing as though the words might change if they looked long enough. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of a moment that would define the company's future. Then Marcus Webb leaned forward. Marcus had served on Ashford's board since the beginning, one of Eleanor's original investors, now in his 70s with silver hair and eyes that had witnessed every corporate game imaginable. He'd sat silent through Hazel's entire presentation, his expression unreadable, his coffee growing cold in front of him. Now he placed both hands flat on the table, the gesture somehow carrying more authority than any amount of raised voices could have conveyed. "For the record," he said, his voice cutting through the tension with quiet, absolute authority, "I vote full confidence in Charlotte Brennan as majority owner and acting CEO of Ashford Industries." The words landed like stones dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward across the room. Patricia Chin didn't hesitate. Seconded. Daniel Reeves, third. Then something remarkable happened, something I hadn't fully anticipated despite all the planning. One by one, other directors found their voices. People who'd sat silent during my humiliation 5 days ago. People who'd listened to Hazel's restructuring plans without protest. People who'd been too afraid or too compliant or too calculating to question her authority when it seemed absolute. "Fourth," said Margaret Hamilton, head of the audit committee, her voice firm. "Fifth," added Robert Pierce, who'd worked alongside Eleanor for 30 years and whose hands were shaking slightly as he raised one in support. Sixth, from Sarah Kimball, a newer director I barely knew but whose expression showed something like relief. The votes came faster now, a cascade of hands and voices. Seventh. Eighth. Ninth. Even directors I'd half expected to side with Hazel were raising their hands, their faces revealing a mixture of emotions. Relief that someone was finally standing up to the ruthless vision she'd been pushing, fear about what came next, hope that maybe the company they'd believed in wasn't lost after all. Within 3 minutes, 11 of 13 board members had voted their confidence. Only 2 remained silent. The directors Hazel had personally appointed just weeks ago, young executives whose loyalties were too new and too compromised to shift now that the ground had moved beneath them. Hazel stood frozen, watching her support evaporate like morning fog burned away by sunlight. This wasn't just a vote of confidence in me. It was a repudiation of her methods, her vision, her contempt for everything Ashford Industries had stood for under Eleanor's leadership. Her face had gone from pale to flushed, anger and humiliation warring for dominance in her expression. I let the moment settle before speaking again, let the votes hang in the air like a judgment that couldn't be appealed. Then I reached for Eleanor's fountain pen, lifting it carefully and placing it in the center of the table where everyone could see it clearly. The silver surface caught the morning light streaming through the windows, gleaming like something precious and permanent. "This pen," I said quietly, "signed Ashford's incorporation papers 40 years ago. Eleanor gave it to me when I signed the ownership transfer. She told me it wasn't just a pen, it was a promise. A covenant." I let the silence hold for a moment, let everyone absorb what the pen represented. Continuity, legacy, the accumulated weight of 4 decades of Eleanor's vision and sacrifice. "Hazel," I continued, turning to face her directly, "you stood in a conference room 5 days ago and called me dead weight. You deliberately used the wrong name to humiliate me in front of witnesses. You fired me publicly to send a message that sentiment has no place in modern business, that loyalty is a liability, that anyone who remembers what this company used to stand for is disposable." My voice remained calm, controlled, but I could feel the anger beneath it. Not explosive or vindictive, but cold and focused and absolutely certain. "But here's what you misunderstood. Legacy isn't sentiment. It's not nostalgia for the old days or resistance to necessary change. Legacy is the accumulated wisdom of decades of decisions. It's the relationships that keep a company stable during crises. It's the institutional knowledge that can't be replaced by consultants with PowerPoint presentations and aggressive timelines." I picked up the restructuring plans she'd been presenting when Maya interrupted, the slides that detailed her vision for Ashford's transformation. "You wanted to cut 30% of our workforce. Hundreds of jobs eliminated to boost profit margins for shareholders who don't know these people's names, don't know their families, don't care whether they can pay their mortgages or send their kids to college." I set the plans down with deliberate care. "That's not leadership, Hazel. That's extraction. That's treating human beings like line items on a balance sheet. And it's not happening here. Not at this company. Not while I'm responsible for Eleanor's legacy." Several directors nodded, their expressions showing agreement, perhaps even gratitude that someone had finally articulated what they'd been uncomfortable saying themselves. Hazel's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. Couldn't speak maybe because there was nothing left to say that would change what had already happened. I pulled out a document Maya had prepared the night before. Simple, straightforward, legally airtight. I signed my name with Eleanor's fountain pen, the scratch of metal on paper loud in the continued silence. "Effective immediately," I said, setting down the pen. "I'm assuming the role of CEO of Ashford Industries." I looked directly at Hazel, who stood rigid at the far end of the table, her face cycling through shock and rage and something that might have been the first recognition that this was actually happening, that her coronation had been replaced by her dethronement. "You have 2 choices," I continued, my voice steady. "You can resign effective immediately with a severance package that recognizes your contributions to operations, because despite everything that's happened, you are talented at your job. You have skills this company could use if they were applied with wisdom instead of contempt." I paused, letting the first option settle. "Or you can stay as VP of Operations reporting directly to me, and you can learn what leadership actually means when it's not built on fear and intimidation." You can learn that respect and efficiency aren't mutually exclusive. That loyalty and innovation can coexist. That preserving what works doesn't mean refusing to improve what doesn't. The choice was deliberate. I wasn't just firing her the way she'd fired me, publicly, cruelly, designed to humiliate and intimidate. I was offering her something she'd never offered me: dignity and a genuine path forward. Whether she took it would reveal whether she was capable of growth or only capable of ambition. Hazel's hands shook as she gripped the table. Her voice, when it finally came, was thin and brittle. "You can't do this." But there was no conviction in the words. She knew as well as everyone else in the room that I already had. The board had voted. The SEC filing was public. Eleanor's fountain pen sat on the table like a gavel that had already struck, rendering judgment that couldn't be appealed. "I just did," I said evenly, not unkindly. "And Hazel? Those tulips I brought on Monday morning? They're still on my desk. Wilting now, brown at the edges, but still there. Because unlike you, I understand that small gestures of respect and continuity matter more than grand declarations of transformation." Applause broke out. Tentative at first, just Patricia Chin and Daniel Reeves, then building as other directors joined in. Not thunderous. Not a standing ovation. But steady, genuine, the sound of people recognizing that justice, however delayed, had finally arrived. Some directors stood. Others nodded with visible relief. Even the two directors Hazel had appointed looked uncertain now, their futures suddenly tied to a CEO who valued loyalty and principle over opportunistic efficiency. Hazel gathered her things in silence. Her leather portfolio. Her expensive pen. Her tablet containing all the restructuring plans and projections that would never be implemented. Her face was pale, her movements mechanical, the shock of reversal still processing through her system. As she reached the door, she paused and turned back. Her expression was complex. Bitterness mixed with something that might have been grudging respect. Defeat mixed with recognition that she'd been outplayed completely. "You planned this," she said quietly. "From the moment Eleanor died, you planned all of this." "No," I corrected gently. "Eleanor planned it. I just had enough faith in her wisdom to follow through. To wait when waiting was painful. To let you reveal yourself completely before showing you the truth." Hazel's laugh was hollow, empty of genuine humor. She always was 10 steps ahead of everyone else. She was, I agreed. Always. And then Hazel was gone, the door closing behind her with a soft click that somehow felt more final than any slam could have been. The end of a chapter. The beginning of something else entirely. The room exhaled collectively, tension draining away like water finally released from a dam. Patricia Chin approached, her eyes bright with emotion that looked like pride mixed with relief. "Charlotte, that was... Eleanor would have been so proud of you." "I hope so," I said, though uncertainty lingered beneath the words. Had I done this for justice or for revenge? Had I protected Eleanor's legacy, or just defended my wounded pride? The line felt blurrier than I wanted to admit. Marcus Webb clasped my shoulder, his grip firm and approving. "What's your first act as CEO?" I thought about the restructuring plans, the employees who'd been dreading layoffs, the departments Hazel had targeted for elimination, the culture of fear she'd been building. "We're canceling the workforce reductions," I said firmly. "All of them. Every position Hazel marked for elimination gets reviewed with fresh eyes. And we're examining every change she pushed through in the last 3 months. If it doesn't align with Eleanor's principles, if it prioritizes short-term profits over long-term stability, we're reversing it." The board nodded, relief visible on multiple faces. This was what they'd wanted but been too afraid to fight for. A return to the company they remembered, the company Eleanor had built on principles that seemed old-fashioned now but had proven their worth through decades of stability. Directors began filing out, some stopping to shake my hand, others simply nodding as they passed. Within minutes, the boardroom was empty except for me and the chair marked majority shareholder and Eleanor's fountain pen still resting on the table. I sat alone in the sudden quiet, feeling the full weight of what I'd just taken on settle onto my shoulders. I wasn't just the guardian of Eleanor's legacy anymore. I was responsible for it. For every decision, every compromise, every sacrifice that would be required to keep Ashford Industries true to what it was supposed to be. And I had no idea if I was actually ready for that burden. I sat alone in the empty boardroom for a long time after everyone left. The chair marked majority shareholder felt heavier than it should have. Just leather and wood and the accumulated weight of 40 years of Eleanor's vision now resting squarely on my shoulders. Eleanor's fountain pen lay on the table where I'd placed it, silver surface catching the late morning light. I picked it up, feeling its familiar weight, and slipped it into my blazer pocket where it belonged. Then I stood and walked back to my office. My office again. Though the victory felt strangely hollow in a way I hadn't anticipated. By noon the entire 10th floor knew what had happened. Word spread through Ashford Industries with the speed that only genuine corporate drama can achieve. Charlotte Brennan, publicly fired just 5 days ago, had returned as majority owner and CEO. Hazel Winters, the ruthless reformer who'd promised transformation, had been offered a choice and had chosen to resign rather than report to the woman she'd humiliated. Employees gathered in clusters throughout the building, voices rising with relief and something approaching celebration. The tension that had gripped the company since my firing began to dissolve like morning fog. Someone brought champagne to the 10th floor, against company policy, but nobody seemed to care. Plastic cups appeared. Toasts were made. People who'd been walking on eggshells for days suddenly found reasons to smile. Maya appeared in my doorway, her eyes shining with emotion. "Boss, the office is going crazy. Everyone wants to thank you. They're asking if you'll come out." I followed her to the main floor where dozens of employees had gathered near the break room. When I appeared, genuine applause erupted, not the polite golf clap of corporate meetings but real, overwhelming gratitude. Sandra from compliance was crying openly as she hugged me. "Thank you," she kept saying. "Thank you for coming back. Thank you for fighting." Thomas from logistics pumped my hand like we just won a championship. "You saved us, Charlotte. You saved all of us." Even Kevin from finance, who I'd never particularly liked and who'd never particularly liked me, looked genuinely happy. "We thought it was over," he said simply. "We thought everything Eleanor built was gone." I accepted the congratulations, the hugs, the grateful words. I smiled and nodded and said the things a CEO is supposed to say in moments like these. But standing in the middle of that celebration I felt strangely detached. Hollow. Yes, I'd won. Yes, justice had been served. Yes, Eleanor's legacy was preserved. But the cost. The cost was beginning to settle into my bones like something permanent that I'd carry forever. I returned to my office after the impromptu celebration died down, closing the door behind me for the first time in days. The corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river and the old brick manufacturing plant where Eleanor had started everything 40 years ago. My space again, reclaimed but somehow different than it had been before. The tulips I'd brought Monday morning still sat in their vase on my desk. They were dying now, petals brown at the edges, stems drooping, the water in the vase cloudy and stagnant. I should have thrown them away days ago. Should have replaced them with fresh flowers, something symbolic of new beginnings and forward momentum. But I left them there. A reminder of where this had started. With a simple gesture of respect met with deliberate cruelty. With hope offered and brutally rejected. With 23 years of loyalty dismissed as dead weight by someone who couldn't even be bothered to remember my name. I sat at my desk and opened the bottom drawer where I'd placed my mother's photograph during the packing process that felt like a lifetime ago but had only been 5 days. She was smiling in the picture, standing in front of her small house decorated with Christmas lights I'd helped hang the previous year. The last time I'd made it home for the holidays before she got sick. The guilt rose up fresh and sharp, cutting through the hollow victory like a knife finding an old wound. I'd won the company, reclaimed Eleanor's legacy, secured my position and dismantled Hazel's ruthless vision. But I'd lost my mother. Lost those final 3 months when I could have been there, could have held her hand, could have told her all the things I'd been too busy to say. And no amount of corporate justice or vindication could bring her back or erase the choice I'd made. Work over family, duty over love, Eleanor's legacy over my own mother's final days on Earth. Was it worth it, Mom? I whispered to the photograph, my voice breaking slightly on the words. She didn't answer. He never would. And I'd have to live with that uncertainty for the rest of my life. The not knowing whether she'd been proud or hurt or understanding or all of those things at once. That evening, after everyone else had gone home and the building settled into its nighttime quiet, I remembered something. The leather portfolio Eleanor had given me at the hospital. I'd been so focused on the stock certificates and legal documents that I'd missed something inside. A sealed envelope with my name written in Eleanor's distinctive handwriting, tucked into a pocket I'd overlooked in my rush to understand the ownership transfer. I retrieved the portfolio from my briefcase and found the envelope, its seal still intact. My hands trembled slightly as I broke it open and unfolded the single page inside. Charlotte, if you're reading this, it means you've reclaimed what was rightfully yours. It means you've stood up to Hazel and the board and everyone who thought they could erase you. I'm proud of you. But I need you to understand something. This isn't really victory. It's responsibility. Tears pricked my eyes as I continued reading. I know what I asked you to sacrifice. I know what you gave up for this company, your relationships, your health, your mother's final Christmas. I carry the guilt of that too, Charlotte. I encouraged your loyalty because I needed someone I could trust, someone who understood what Ashford really meant. But in doing so I may have asked too much. The next paragraph made me set the letter down, my hands shaking. You have a choice now, a choice I never gave you before. You can lead this company, carry forward the legacy we built together, and sacrifice even more of yourself in service of something larger. Or you can sell your shares, walk away with wealth and freedom, and finally build a life that belongs to you, not to Ashford Industries. I hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected Eleanor to give me permission, encouragement even, to let go. Whatever you choose, I'll be proud. Because unlike Hazel, unlike so many leaders who confuse control with authority, you understand what really matters. People. Relationships. The small gestures that build trust and community. The tulips you brought to Hazel were everything I taught you about leadership. And the fact that she dismissed them, that tells you everything you need to know about the difference between you and her. The letter ended simply. Choose wisely, Charlotte. And whatever you choose, forgive yourself for what you couldn't save. Your mother would have understood. She would have been proud. Just as I am. Eleanor. I set the letter down on my desk next to the wilting tulips and sat in the darkness of my office, Eleanor's final question echoing in my mind. What did I really want? I spent the weekend alone in my apartment thinking. About Eleanor's letter. About my mother's photograph. About the choice I'd been given and what it actually meant. I could walk away. Sell the shares for a fortune that would set me up for life. Build something that belonged only to me. Relationships, hobbies, a life outside these office walls. Or I could stay. Carry Eleanor's legacy forward. Try to lead differently than I'd lived. Try to build a company that valued people without consuming them the way it had consumed me. By Monday morning I'd made my decision. I called an all-staff meeting in the main auditorium. Everyone from executives to assembly line workers, everyone who made Ashford Industries function. They filled the seats, faces curious and hopeful, wondering what their new CEO would say. I stood at the podium with Eleanor's fountain pen in my pocket and I began simply. 5 days ago I was fired from this company. Not for poor performance. Not for ethical violations. But because I represented something the new leadership wanted to erase. Loyalty, institutional knowledge, and the belief that employees are people, not line items on a balance sheet. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I'm back now as your CEO. And I want to make some promises. Not about profits or market share or transformation. I want to promise you something Eleanor taught me. That this company exists to serve the people who work here, the communities we operate in, and the principles we build on. I outlined my vision. No mass layoffs, investment in training and development, profit-sharing programs that rewarded long-term loyalty, sustainable growth over short-term extraction. We won't be the most profitable company in our industry. We won't make headlines for ruthless efficiency. But we will be a company where people matter. Where careers are built, not exploited. Where small gestures, like bringing tulips to welcome a new colleague, still mean something. The applause that followed was different from Friday's boardroom vote or the impromptu celebration on the 10th floor. This was quieter, deeper. The sound of people recognizing that something fundamental had shifted, that maybe they could believe in this place again. After the meeting, Maya found me in the hallway. Boss, can I ask you something? Of course. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Eleanor's letter. You could have walked away. Sold the company. Retired rich. Why choose this burden? I thought about my mother's photo. About Eleanor's pen. About the 23 years I'd already given. Because someone has to, I said simply. And maybe, just maybe, I can do it better than I did before. Maybe I can lead without sacrificing everything. Maybe I can build a legacy that honors both Eleanor and my mother. Maya nodded slowly. I think you will. As I walked back to my office that evening, past the glass walls and the river view and the wilting tulips I still hadn't thrown away, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the naive hope of youth, but the weathered, hard-won hope of someone who'd lost everything and chosen to rebuild anyway. The fountain pen pressed against my ribs through my blazer pocket, a reminder that legacy wasn't just what you inherited, it was what you chose to create from the ruins of what came before. And my legacy, I decided, would be different. It would honor sacrifice without demanding more of it. It would value loyalty without exploiting it. It would remember that leadership wasn't about power or profit, but about the people who trusted you to do right by them. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It arrives quietly with trembling tulips, a fountain pen, and the courage to choose responsibility over bitterness. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. If this story of corporate justice had you holding your breath, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Charlotte walked into that boardroom with Eleanor's fountain pen, knowing exactly what was coming next. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.